The Israeli government says it will oppose South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. Pretoria is asking for a preliminary order to stop Israel's military action in Gaza as part of its application. South Africa has also accused Tel Aviv of committing acts of genocide against Palestinians. International Relations Director General Zane Dangor is with us for more. Zane, I appreciate your time this evening. Now, what specific incidents or actions does South Africa point to as evidence of genocidal acts committed by Israel in Gaza? And how are these detailed in that application to the ICJ, which you've recently made?
Look, so genocide normally entails mass deaths, and we've seen significant numbers of killings of civilians over the last 2 months, since October the 7th. So it's over 20,000, most likely 30,000 if one does not, because at the moment the numbers do not include people missing under the rubble. Most of those killed were civilians, mostly children, women, and other non-combatants. But the important issue around genocide is what is, in the Genocide Convention, is the issue of special intent. And that element has to be present. It's very difficult to prove genocide otherwise without special intent. So aside from looking at the systemic and mass killings of civilians, we've looked at the intent, and the signals of intent have come from various leaders within the Israeli government, from the Prime Minister to Ministers of Defense, Ministers of Finance. It also ranges, to some of the leaders in the military. But the Genocide Convention also, it talks about the need to prevent and to punish acts of genocide, but it also talks about state parties being obliged to also deal with those who incite genocide. So we've also seen significant numbers of statements of genocidal intent coming from leading, commentators in the Israeli media and others, and no action has been taken there. So what we've seen is that you have the combination of mass deaths, and also accompanied by the statements of intent. So it's not just the killings, but it's also the intent to destroy in whole or in part a defined group, and that is in this case the Palestinians. We've also seen the intent to depopulate Gaza, and that is through the mass destructions of the means to maintain a livelihood, the destructions of homes, hospitals, all the means necessary to sustain a livelihood is also dealt with in the Genocide Convention. The argument that is being made at this stage is that the humanitarian crisis is not as a consequence of the attack. The humanitarian crisis is a direct aim of the attacks, which is again the component of genocide then comes into that. We've seen over the last couple of days talks about voluntary, sort of migration, but none of this is voluntary given the fact that it is taking place in the context of an armed attack. And so our application details all of these. And we detail the facts in terms of the numbers of people being killed, but it also details the important element of intent, and we demonstrate intent in our application.
Now, Zane, we must talk about how South Africa responds to Israel's assertion that it's defending itself against a massive attack by Hamas on October 7th, and that its military actions were in response to this threat. So it cannot be disputed that when the war started on October 7th, it was a result of this, what Israel has called an unprovoked attack by Hamas, which led to the killing of close on 1,200 Israelis.
So I think no matter what happened on the 7th of October, and we've criticized the actions by the armed militants, any attack on civilians is a war crime. Nothing can justify genocide, and the scale of Israel's response to that hasn't just breached war crimes or crimes against humanity. As we've saying, with the issue of intent, it also brings the component of genocide into it. So that is why we're invoking the Genocide Convention. I think we've said this on many occasions too, that the attack on 7th of October was deplorable, but we mustn't lose the context that this is taking place in the context of 75 years of dispossession and close to 50 years of a belligerent occupation. So you've always had a belligerent occupation means there's always been a conflict taking place, and that an occupying power can use policing powers but not an army on the people that it has occupied and has essentially full control over. So these are all the legal matters that we've canvassed over the last 2 or 3 months. But I think right now we're looking at the issue of genocide, given the fact that, as we're saying, the issue of intent is very clear.
Now, what actions or interventions is South Africa seeking from the ICJ through this case, and how does it aim to address the situation in Gaza?
So the important part of it is that this will be a long case, in essence, because you have to look at, as I'm pointing out, the facts. You have to look and interrogate, and as I say, the court will have to do that, interrogate the issues of intent that we are putting forward. Of course, Israel will defend that. What we're also asking for is provisional measures to be put in place. And these provisional measures are aimed to stop any of the actions that we are saying amount to breaches of the Genocide Convention. This will include a ask from our side that there's an immediate ceasefire, because the armed attacks constitutes a component of the genocidal actions by Israel. So this will be part of our provisional measures that we're asking for, and this will be the first hearing on this particular component of the case will take place on the 11th of January.
Now, a few weeks ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa had a conversation with the Jewish Board of Governors, a representative of whom I spoke to on News at Prime a couple of days ago. I'd just like you to listen to excerpts of that conversation before we carry on to my next question.
We end up finding ourselves cited in a document which is going to be presented in a court of law. And I don't understand that the point of our meeting was to alert the government to anti-Semitism and to convey our concerns about the lack of diplomatic services for South African citizens in Israel. The fact that the South African government have twisted that meeting to incorporate them into this document really makes me wonder about their credentials and their truthfulness, because that is not what the meeting was about. The meeting was not about Israel. And there's one other thing I want to say about that. I'm a South African citizen. I'm not Israeli. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I do not represent the Israelis, nor do I represent the Israeli government. The idea that in some way the government somehow mistook talking to the Jewish community as somehow communicating with the Israeli government. And we made it clear, again, in that meeting, that that is not the case. The fact that they took, honestly, a position from their own citizens coming to speak to them on behalf of fears and the concerns that we have, and somehow suggesting that we are representing a foreign country is disgraceful anti-Semitism. There's no other way of.
So that is the South African government being called out by Professor Milner, who is the chair of the Jewish Board of Governors. What is your reaction to that, Zane?
So I think you mean South African Jewish Board of Deputies, right?
Jewish Board of Deputies, I beg your pardon, yes.
Yeah. So look, the meeting took place with the president. There was a media statement about what some of these discussions were all about. The media statement coming from the side of the presidency also said that what the president reiterated in that meeting was that South Africa feels strongly that there should be a ceasefire and felt that the actions by Israel was genocidal. This was in the public domain. What the legal team did was not talk about engagement with the government of Israel in this instance. It was listing all the elements where senior government officials, including the president, had spoken about genocide in the public domain. So it wasn't a particular reference to this meeting only. It was referencing all the instances where the president may have used the term genocide in his public engagements. So that is essentially where the legal team felt that it was necessary to put that into the application document. in no way was this seen as a means to foster anti-Semitism. I think the government is very clear that all forms of Jewish hatred and anti-Jewish hatred is something that we will not accept and we will fight against. So I don't think that it's a fair reflection by the Jewish Board of Deputies to try and implicate the president and others in this particular manner, because the legal team felt it necessary to put all the facts in the document, and all the facts included all the instances where senior government officials would have used the term genocide. And there was a public report on the meeting where the president was on record as having said that in his meeting with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. So it's no way in a way seeking to conflate the Jewish Board of Deputies with representing the government of Israel.
Well, let's come back to Israel and talk about how South Africa intends to respond to Israel's rejection of these allegations.
Look, I think that it's precisely why we're using the institutions of global governance. In this instance, the institution that we are approaching is the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the international, global governance framework. We are making a set of assertions about genocide in the context of the Genocide Convention, particularly our responsibilities as a state party to ensure that we fulfill our obligations to prevent and punish genocide. Israel can and should, and they are going to defend their position. So on the 11th we will present, on the 12th they will make their case. And this is precisely what should be happening. We're not going to respond to the manner in which Israel has approached the fact that we have approached the ICJ in terms of the Genocide Convention. What it does do is just show that there is a dispute between ourselves and the government of Israel about the genocide, and the fact that our assertion is that they are not keeping up with their obligations in terms of the convention. And what they're doing through these statements is just further concretizing the fact that there is a dispute, and the court will be dealing with this. The Article 9 approach that we have taken is essentially around a dispute between two state parties about genocide.
Director General of DIRCO, Zane Dangor, appreciate your time this evening.